The first light of dawn crept over the dry ridges, painting the desert in pale gold. Smoke still hung in the air from the night's raid, curling up in thin threads that smelled of burnt wood and fear. The camp was silent, except for the restless shifting of horses and the soft rattle of chains. A woman sat near the ashes of what once had been a fire, her wrists bound, her hair tangled with dust. She had stopped crying hours ago. The fear in her eyes had dried into something harder, something that looked like defiance. When the Apache warrior stepped into the light, she didn't flinch. His shadow fell across her face, and for a moment their eyes met, one filled with rage, the other with a calm that could almost be mistaken for peace. He carried no gun, only a long knife that glinted faintly in the morning light. He didn't speak right away. The wind tugged at his dark hair and lifted the feathers tied to his arm. He studied her the way a man studies something he doesn't yet understand, something that doesn't belong to him, yet calls to him in a strange way. Around them, the other warriors were mounting their horses, ready to move before the sun grew too high. She was the last captive left unchained. He walked closer, the sand crunching under his moccasins, and then he knelt beside her. The blade touched the chain, and with a swift pull, the iron broke apart. "You're free now," he said quietly. The woman didn't rise. Her wrists were red and raw, but she didn't rub them. She looked at him with eyes that had seen more than one kind of death. Then, with a trembling breath, she whispered, "I'd rather die than be yours." The words hit him like a bullet. He didn't move, only watched her stand, weak but proud. For a long moment, the desert wind was the only sound between them. It carried the faint echo of distant hoofbeats and the smell of mesquite. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, a lonely sound that hung in the air like a warning. No one knew her story. Some said she was taken from a burned settlement days ago, the only survivor when raiders swept through the valley. Others whispered that she came willingly, running from something even worse. But the truth was buried deep, hidden behind her silence and her refusal to beg. The Apache warrior had seen many captives before. Some pleaded, some cursed, some prayed. None had ever looked at him the way she did, like he was both her savior and her enemy. He stood and looked toward the rising sun. "You can walk," he said. "The nearest town is 2 days from here." She looked at the open desert and then back at him. "You'd let me die out there?" He shrugged. "You said you'd rather die." Her jaw tightened. For a heartbeat she looked ready to strike him, but then her gaze fell on the horses, the warriors ready to leave, and the endless land stretching in every direction. Freedom wasn't always mercy. Sometimes it was a curse. She had lost her home, her family, and her faith in kindness. Yet, now faced with this man who had just set her free, she felt something else. A strange pull that frightened her more than the chains ever had. The Apache turned and gave a short command in his tongue. One of the men rode forward, tossing a small water skin at her feet. Then they rode off, leaving her standing alone beside the dying fire. Dust rose around them, and within moments they vanished behind the ridges. The silence that followed was deep and heavy. She was free, and yet she had never felt more trapped. Her throat burned from thirst, and her body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind was sharper than ever. Freedom was hers now, and so was the choice, to walk toward death or to follow the path those men had taken. She looked down at the knife mark on the chain and touched it gently. His knife had been clean, precise, almost careful. That small act lingered in her thoughts. There had been something in his eyes, a flicker of humanity, or maybe pity. She shook her head, unwilling to believe it. Men like him didn't feel pity. They took what they wanted and left ruin behind. Still, the image of him cutting her free refused to leave her mind. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down on her shoulders, and the desert began to shimmer. She found a half-broken trail that wound between dry rocks and low brush. With each step, her bare feet tore against the ground, but she didn't stop. She walked until her vision blurred and the world swayed. Just when she thought she would fall, a sound reached her ears, the distant crack of a rifle, sharp and echoing. Then came another. Her heart froze. Gunfire meant men, and men meant danger. She crouched low, hiding behind a boulder, her breath ragged. Voices drifted through the dry air, angry, desperate, in English. Then she heard another voice, deeper, calmer, speaking Apache. Her pulse quickened. It was him. He was back. Or maybe he had never gone far. She crawled closer, just enough to see them through the haze. The Apache and his men had come across a small group of riders, settlers, by the look of them. The standoff was tense, guns drawn, words exchanged like threats in the wind. She could see his face now, calm but alert, his knife still hanging at his belt. She didn't understand what they were saying, but she saw one of the settlers raise his weapon. A shot cracked through the air, and chaos exploded. Horses reared, men shouted, and the smell of gunpowder filled the wind. The woman pressed her hands to her mouth to stop from crying out. She watched as the Apache warrior moved with a speed that seemed impossible, striking one man down and turning toward another. The fight was over in seconds, but the silence that followed felt endless. 2 men lay still on the ground, and 1 horse limped away into the desert. When it was over, the Apache stood there, chest heaving, dust clinging to his skin. Then his gaze lifted, and found her. She froze, her heart hammering. For a long, unbearable moment, neither moved. She didn't know whether to run or thank him. He didn't speak, only walked toward her with slow, steady steps. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark and deep. When he reached her, he looked down at her bare feet, then at the horizon. "You followed," he said. She tried to speak but couldn't find her voice. He handed her the waterskin again, his hand rough and warm. She hesitated, then took it. The taste of water burned her throat, but brought life back to her body. She wanted to say thank you, but pride stopped her. He seemed to understand. His expression softened for a heartbeat, then turned hard again. "You can't go alone," he said. "There are worse things than me in this land." She clenched the waterskin and whispered, "Then I'll take my chances." He studied her face, the stubborn fire in her eyes, and for the first time he smiled. "Just barely. You will not make it far," he said. "But I will not stop you." He turned away and walked toward his horse. She watched him mount and ride off without looking back. Dust rose behind him, fading into the golden horizon. She stood there trembling, torn between hate and something she couldn't name. Every part of her wanted to hate him, to remember the fear, the anger, the loss. But another part, buried deep, remembered the way he had cut her free without demand, without harm. The desert stretched before her, endless and unforgiving, and somewhere beyond it waited whatever fate she chose. She took 1 step forward, then another. The wind picked up, carrying the faint echo of hoofbeats behind her. She turned, and far off on the ridge a lone rider stopped and looked back. Their eyes met again across the distance, his expression unreadable, hers defiant. The sun burned high above, and between them lay miles of dust, danger, and questions neither could yet answer. The woman's steps grew slower as the day dragged on. The heat shimmered above the rocks, and her breath came heavy. She hadn't seen a drop of water since morning, except the small mouthful the Apache had left her. Each mile she walked seemed to pull her deeper into a land that felt both wild and sacred, as if every stone and cactus carried a memory of old blood and older spirits. The silence was broken only by the distant call of a hawk or the faint whisper of wind through dry brush. But in her mind, voices would not stop. The screams from the raid still echoed. The smell of smoke still clung to her hair. She could still see the faces of those who had fallen when the fire spread through her settlement. Her father's last words were lost under the sound of gunfire. Before that night, her world had been small and peaceful. A lonely ranch at the edge of the desert, a patch of dry land, and a cabin built by hands that believed in hope. Her husband had left months before, riding west in search of work, promising to return by harvest. He never did, so she lived alone, tending to the animals, fixing fences, trying to forget the fear that came with every howl of the coyotes at night. Then came the raid. It was swift and merciless. She never knew who started it. Some said it was Apaches striking back after soldiers attacked one of their camps. Others said it was bandits using their name to spread terror. All she knew was that one moment she was feeding the horse, and the next, fire lit the sky and men shouted in tongues she could not understand. She had been dragged from the burning barn, thrown across a horse, and taken into the wilderness. For days, she was moved from place to place, never knowing where she was or why she was kept alive. She waited for the moment they would kill her, but it never came. Instead, they gave her food, water, and silence. The warrior who had freed her that morning was the same one who had stopped another man from striking her. He had said something in Apache then, sharp and commanding, and the others had stepped back. She had hated him for that. Hated him because she couldn't understand whether he was saving her or claiming her. Now, as she stumbled through the sand, her thoughts blurred between fear and exhaustion. The land around her looked endless, but she kept walking. Somewhere ahead, maybe there was a town, maybe not. The only thing that pushed her forward was stubbornness, the same iron that had made her survive when everything else had burned. The sun lowered, throwing long shadows across the red rocks. Her legs gave out and she fell to her knees. Dust rose around her and she pressed her forehead to the ground. She didn't pray. She had stopped praying a long time ago. A faint sound made her lift her head. A horse's neigh, soft but close. Her heart skipped. She crawled behind a boulder, peering out. There across the dry ridge, the Apache warrior sat on his horse, watching her again. The wind caught the feathers on his shoulder, and his dark eyes were steady. He hadn't followed her openly. He had stayed far enough to let her think she was alone, but close enough to keep her in sight. She wanted to scream at him, to throw stones, to make him leave her, but something inside stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange sense that if he left, she would not survive the night. When the sun dipped low, she lit a small fire using dry brush. He came closer then, slowly stopping a few yards away. She didn't look up, but she felt his gaze on her as she warmed her hands. "You should not light a fire," he said after a while. His English was rough but clear. "It tells others where you are." "I'm not hiding," she said. "Let them come." He watched her for a long moment, then got down from his horse and sat across from her. "You have no weapon, no horse, no water. You would die before the next sunrise." She stared at the fire, its orange light flickering over her face. "Maybe that's better than being anyone's prisoner." He nodded slightly, as if he understood more than she wanted him to. "Not all chains are made of iron," he said. She looked at him then, searching his face for mockery. But there was none. His eyes were dark, thoughtful, and weary. There were scars across his arm, faint but old. He didn't carry himself like a man who enjoyed taking captives. He looked like someone who had seen too many losses and learned to hide them behind silence. "Why did you let me go?" she asked finally. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear. "Because killing you would make me no different from those who burned my people," he said quietly. She frowned. "Your people?" He turned to her. "The soldiers. They came in spring. Said we stole horses. Said we killed settlers. They shot our elders, burned our homes, took our children. You think only your people suffer?" His words cut through her like the desert wind. For the first time, she saw him not as a savage, but as someone born into a war that neither of them started. She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't. He wasn't the man who had burned her home. He was another kind of prisoner, of revenge, of loss, of a land soaked in blood. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. In the distance, a coyote howled, long and mournful. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the heat. The Apache rose and took a folded blanket from his horse, tossing it to her without a word. She caught it, surprised. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He paused before answering. "Because tomorrow, when you walk away, you will remember that not all Apaches are monsters." That is enough. Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask his name, but she didn't. Instead, she turned away, pulling the blanket around her. The smell of leather and smoke clung to it. When she finally closed her eyes, the sound of his horse shifting nearby was the last thing she heard. The next morning, he was gone. The fire was out, and the blanket lay neatly folded beside her. There were hoofprints leading east, toward the mountains. She stood, rubbing her sore arms, and looked toward the faint line of the trail. She should have gone the other way, toward the towns and the soldiers, but her feet turned toward the mountains instead. Something about him had unsettled her, pulled her into a path she didn't understand. As she walked, she found signs of their passing. Hoofprints, ashes, a broken feather caught on a branch. Each trace made her wonder where they were headed. The land grew harsher, the rocks sharper, the air thinner. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy. A storm was coming. She knew she wouldn't make it alone. By late afternoon, the wind had turned wild. Sand whipped against her skin, and she could barely see ahead. She stumbled into a shallow ravine for shelter, covering her face with her hands. Then, through the storm, she saw movement. A horse, a dark figure against the swirling dust. He was back again, leading his horse with slow, steady steps. He stopped at the edge of the ravine and looked down at her, his face half hidden by the storm. "You don't listen," he said. She tried to smile, though her lips were cracked. "You didn't expect me to." He nodded once, then helped her up onto his horse without another word. The wind roared around them as they rode through the desert. She didn't know where he was taking her, only that for the first time since her capture, she wasn't afraid. Night fell by the time they reached a narrow canyon. Hidden deep within was a small camp, a few tents, a fire, and children's laughter faintly echoing through the rocks. She froze when she saw them. These weren't raiders. They were families, women with babies, old men tending fires, boys with faces too young to carry such fear. The Apache dismounted and gestured for her to follow. "They are what's left of us," he said quietly. The army took the rest. She looked around, speechless. The people glanced at her but said nothing. There was no anger, only weariness. One woman brought her a bowl of water. The kindness in her eyes made the captive woman's heart ache. As the night deepened, she sat near the fire again, listening to the whispers of the camp. The Apache sat apart, sharpening his knife in silence. The storm outside faded into a low rumble. The woman looked at him, at the people, at the land that had swallowed both their worlds. For the first time, she realized that maybe the story wasn't about who belonged to whom, but about what it meant to survive in a place where mercy was the rarest thing of all. She looked up at the dark sky, the stars flickering faintly through the clouds, and whispered to herself, "I'd rather die than be yours." Yet even as she said it, she wasn't sure who she was speaking to anymore. The man across the fire, the land itself, or the ghosts that still followed her through the desert night. The storm broke in the night and left the canyon washed clean by morning. Cold air settled under the high rock walls, carrying the smell of wet earth and smoke from the small cooking fires. The woman woke on a woven mat under a lean-to, the blanket still tucked around her. She listened to the sounds of the hidden camp and realized how ordered it was. No shouting, no drunken laughter, only the soft murmur of women stirring pots, the light thud of bare feet, and the low voices of men planning the day. She sat up and watched the Apache warrior speaking with an older man whose hair was silver at the temples. They stood over a rough map drawn in the dust. The older man tapped the line that marked the river and shook his head. The river had thinned to a cracked ribbon. Drought was another kind of enemy. From the shadows, a boy about 10 winters old stared at her with wide eyes. He carried a toy made of yucca fiber and bits of bone. When she smiled at him, he stepped closer. Up close, she saw the scar across his eyebrow and the quiet alertness of someone who had learned to hide before learning to play. A woman, likely his mother, called him back in Apache, but not unkindly. The child's gaze lingered on the woman until he turned away. The warrior walked to her and crouched across the fire pit. "You can leave today," he said, "before the sun is high. I will take you to the edge of the valley. After that, you choose your road." She looked toward the narrow slot of sky where the canyon opened to the desert. "If I leave," she said, "what happens to your people?" He glanced back at the children chasing each other around a scrub tree. "They will walk," he said simply. "We always walk." He rose as if the matter was decided, but she stood and followed him. "Why are the soldiers hunting you?" she asked. "Is it the raid?" He stopped. The camp quieted around them as if the rocks leaned closer to listen. "Some of the men you saw that night were ours," he said. "Some were not. Traders used our name to frighten the ranches and take cattle. Other bands struck at the rail crews laying iron through the hills. Then the army came. They do not ask who is guilty. They count bodies." She felt the land tilt beneath her. What had been simple in the dark of her rage now frayed at the edges. "There must be a treaty," she said. "Someone must talk." The warrior's mouth tightened. "A paper can be burned. A word can be broken. The water holes cannot lie. They are dry." He turned to walk away, but a small girl ran to him and pressed a hand to his knee, chattering. He lifted her and set her on his hip the way any uncle might. For a moment he looked younger, almost unburdened. Then a shout went up at the canyon rim. Men sprang to their feet. The warrior handed the child back to her mother and moved with the others toward the narrow entrance. The woman followed until a hand touched her sleeve. It was the elder with silver hair. He nodded toward a shaded corner. "Stay in shadow," he said in slow English. "Do not stand where a bullet comes first." At the rim, 2 scouts waved a signal. "Riders on the flats." Dust plumes low, not many horses. The warrior lifted a long glass taken from a dead surveyor seasons ago and studied the horizon. The woman saw his shoulders loosen slightly. Not a cavalry column. A small party, traders or a local posse. He gave a quick set of signs. The camp began to vanish. Tents came down in a breath. Pots disappeared. Children slipped into cracks in the rock like lizards. In minutes, the canyon looked empty, only a stray ember glowing. The riders stopped a mile off. The warrior moved to a ledge with two men and settled in like a hawk watching a field. The woman felt the press of suspense tighten her chest, not just for herself but for the children hidden under blankets in cool caves. The elder stood beside her, his face unreadable. "Sometimes we trade," he said. "Sometimes they bring whiskey and take anger home." The riders waved a white cloth and advanced slowly. The warrior waited until they were close enough to see faces. The leader wore a coat that had been fine once, salt-stained now. Beside him was a younger man with a red bandana and a nervous jaw. Another held a small flag on a stick as if to steady his hand. They carried no army colors. The leader called out in broken Apache and then in English. "We come with news. We come for a child." The canyon held its breath. The warrior glanced at the elder, who nodded. He stood and stepped into view. "Speak," he said. The leader cleared his throat. "A patrol from Fort Loomis rides south. They say Apaches took a settler woman 2 nights back." He looked uncertainly toward the woman before continuing. "They sent a paper to town offering coin for any captive turned over alive. Some folks whisper your band took her. I do not care about coin. I came because a boy from our town is missing. He was last seen near the river. We found moccasin tracks. We want him back." A murmur went through the hidden camp. The woman felt a strange coldness. A missing boy. She thought of the scar on the child's brow and his quiet gaze over the toy. The warrior's eyes flicked toward the shadow where the children hid, then back to the riders. "We have no boy from your town," he said. "Our own were taken months ago." He did not raise his voice, but it carried. The leader frowned. "Tracks go to the hills," he insisted, "and folks say your men traded a milk cow yesterday. The brand is from our valley." The warrior's jaw set. "Cattle stray," he said. "Men lie. Soldiers burn." The standoff stretched like rawhide left in the sun. The riders' horses stamped and tossed their heads. The woman could feel a choice gathering like thunder at the edge of the sky. If the riders saw the camp, it would bring more men, more weapons, the end of this fragile refuge. Then another voice rose from the canyon wall. It was thin but strong, the elder's wife. "Ask them where the survey men go," she called in English roughened by age. "Ask them what they pay to lay iron across graves." The leader looked startled. "The rail crews are north. They cleared out after the last attack. We do not want them back. The railroad brings gamblers and hard drink. It brings the army. We only want the boy." The warrior lifted a hand. "Go home," he said. "The next riders will wear blue. You do not want to be here when they come." He stepped back, and in that motion the canyon swallowed him again. The riders hesitated, then turned and rode toward the flats, their dust pulled thin by a rising breeze. When the last speck faded, the camp exhaled. People emerged from stone and shadow. But the calm did not return. The elder and the warrior argued in low tones beside the fire pit. The woman moved closer and caught enough English to follow. The elder wanted to move immediately into the high mesas, land harsh enough to lose a regiment. The warrior wanted to stay one more night to gather food and check a spring and a sidewash. The elder warned that the soldiers would find the ravine by noon tomorrow. The warrior countered that if they fled empty, the old and the small would fail in the open. Neither raised a voice. The decision was not simple. As they spoke, the woman felt another thread tug at the fabric of the day. She found the boy with the scar sitting alone near the canyon wall, turning a smooth stone in his hands. When she knelt, he slid a glance to her face, measuring her. She spoke softly. "Do you come from the town?" she asked. He shook his head once, his mouth pressed flat, a stubborn little line. She looked toward the women stirring corn and beans. The boy's mother watched with guarded eyes. The woman returned to the boy. "What is your name?" she asked. He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened on the stone. She reached out and touched the toy he had left in the dust. "My father made me toys from bone when I was small," she said. "He said the land remembers those who laugh on it." The boy's face shifted a degree, a cloud crossing a pale sun. He spoke one word in Apache and pointed at the canyon mouth. "Found." She glanced toward the entrance. "Found where?" He pointed again and traced a circle on the ground, then a line like water. "Found at the spring." The woman stood slowly, the meaning settling like silt in a jar. Perhaps the boy was not taken from town. Perhaps he had been found near the spring and had followed them like a stray foal. Or perhaps he did belong to the town and would not say so, out of fear or loyalty to the hands that fed him now. Either way, the spring in the sidewash had become more than water. It was a knot tying all paths. While the camp prepared to move, another subplot slid into focus. On the far edge of the canyon, two young men argued over a small sack. The woman saw the warrior stride to them and pull the sack open. Inside was a handful of silver coins stamped with a federal eagle. The men looked defiant. One spoke in a flood of Apache. The warrior's face went still. He asked a single question and their eyes fell. The elder joined them. The story came out in pieces. At dawn before the storm, the young men had traded a branded calf to a drifter near the river for these coins, thinking to buy cartridges before the soldiers closed the trails. The drifter had smiled too easily. Now the coins felt heavy with trouble. The brand matched the town, and the drifter had likely run to the fort with his story. The men were not cruel. They were desperate. The line between hunger and theft was thin as a reed. The woman watched the warrior weigh the coins in his hand, and then toss them into the fire. They sizzled and blackened, a small, useless wealth. He did not shame the young men. He only said, "You will walk at the rear and carry the burdens until we find the mountain trail." The men bowed their heads. She felt a tug in her chest she was not ready to name. As the sun slid toward afternoon, the warrior led a small party to scout the spring in the sidewash. The woman asked to go. He studied her for a long second and then nodded. "Keep low," he said. "Do not touch the ground where the water runs. If a scout reads your print, he will know a woman walks with us." They moved through the rock like shadows. At the mouth of the wash, the warrior signaled a halt. He crawled forward on his belly, lifted his glass, and fixed it on the far slope. The woman waited, every sense stretched. A hawk circled. Somewhere a stone rolled and clicked. The warrior eased back and whispered, "Blue coats. 2, maybe 3 more behind the ridge." They watched the spring. Her throat tightened. The soldiers were not at the canyon yet. They were sitting on water, which was worse. If the camp moved without water, the old and young would fail. If they fought, the sound would call more men. The warrior's eyes flicked over the ground. He pointed to a narrow cut that ran above the spring, a hidden shelf worn by floodwater. "We take water from the back with gourds," he said. Night only. They waited until the sun kissed the rim. A coyote barked twice from far off. An answer came from the canyon. Signals nested inside the land. The warrior and another man slid down the cut with 2 gourds and vanished. The woman pressed herself into the rock, tasting grit on her tongue. She watched the slope where the soldiers waited. A flash of brass gave one away, then the shape of a hat. She imagined their thoughts. A patrol sent to hold a spring until a larger force arrived. Perhaps a young lieutenant eager to make a name. Perhaps a sergeant who only cared about getting his men home. The frontier did not divide cleanly. Men carried orders and orders carried trouble. A shout broke across the wash, not from the soldiers but from the far side. A gun cracked. The woman flinched. The warrior did not return. Another shout, closer. A man in a blue blouse stumbled into view, clutching his arm. The woman saw a third shape on the ridge. Not blue, not Apache. A hunter's hat, a long coat. The easy stance of a drifter who sells news for drink. The drifter had found both sides and decided to profit from the noise. He fired again and a soldier ducked. The slope exploded into confusion. The woman nearly cried out, but a hand pressed her shoulder. The elder had come like smoke. His whisper was dry as leaves. "Do not move." Then the warrior rose from the cut behind the spring, water gourd strapped to his back, knife in hand. He did not attack the bluecoats. He cut the rope that held their horses to a mesquite bush. The animals started, reared, and bolted up the wash. The soldiers ran after them, shouting. The drifter lifted his gun toward the warrior. The woman grabbed a loose stone and threw it down the slope. It struck near the drifter's feet. He jerked and shot wide. The echo rang across the ravine. The warrior slid back into the cut and vanished with the water. They did not breathe until the wash was empty. The elder looked at the woman with surprise that softened into something like respect. He nodded once. "You will live," he said. It was not quite praise. It was a measurement. By starlight, the camp drank and filled skins. No one laughed. The sound they had made at the spring would carry. The warrior posted watchers on the rim and checked each child's feet for blisters. He spoke with the young men who had taken the coins, then sat apart sharpening his knife. The woman settled near the fire with the boy at her side. He leaned against her without asking, as if some long hunger he barely understood had eased for a moment. She thought of the town where she might trade news for safety. She thought of the fort where a lieutenant would write her words into a report and send riders before dawn. She thought of the railroad survey that would mark this canyon on a map as a crossing to be cleared. She thought of the broken ranch where she had once planned to grow squash and raise foals, and wait for a man who never came home. Every road led into a windstorm. Near midnight, a scout slid back from the rim and whispered to the warrior. He rose at once and looked toward the dark east beyond the canyon mouth. The wind shifted and brought a sound like distant surf. Not water. Hoofbeats, many. The elder stood and pressed his palm to the rock as if feeling the earth's pulse. The warrior met the woman's eyes briefly. There was no fear in his face, only the grim steadiness of someone who has seen dawns that cut both ways. He turned to the camp and gave a low command. Packs lifted. Children woke without a cry. The line began to move toward a hidden crack in the canyon wall that led to the high mesas. The woman stood with the boy's hand in hers, the blanket around her shoulders, her heart pounding. She looked once at the narrow entrance where the sound grew fuller and the dust began to bloom like a ghostly cloud. The warrior paused at the mouth of the hidden trail and glanced back, his silhouette black against the star-washed sky. For an instant their eyes met across the hush. He raised his hand, not in farewell, but in a promise of choice yet to be taken. Then the first distant bugle cut the night, thin and cold as a wire pulled tight, and the canyon answered with 1,000 small echoes that felt like the land itself holding its breath. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, rolling like distant thunder through the canyon. The ground trembled beneath the woman's bare feet as she stood clutching the boy's hand, her pulse racing in rhythm with the noise. The Apache warrior moved among his people swiftly, his commands quiet but sharp. The older men helped the women gather their few belongings while the younger ones armed themselves with old rifles and bows. Smoke from the dying fire curled upward and disappeared into the cold night air. The canyon that had felt safe now seemed too small to hold all that fear. The woman's eyes darted toward the dark cut in the wall where they had hidden their path to the high mesas. The warriors were guiding the families that way first, children and elders moving silently in a single line. She wanted to follow, yet her gaze kept returning to the warrior. He stood at the canyon mouth, the wind tugging at his hair, his face set toward the open desert. He had been ready for this. Somehow he had known it would come. His horse pawed the ground beside him, restless. The bugle cried again, closer this time, thin and sharp. The woman's stomach twisted. She had heard that sound before, the night her settlement burned. The soldiers had come too late to save anyone, but not too late to chase the ones who survived. Now that same sound seemed to circle back through her life, chasing her again, this time from the other side. The warrior turned briefly toward her. "Go," he said. "Take the boy. Stay close to the others." She didn't move. "What about you?" "I will hold them here," he replied. "If they find the trail too soon, no one will escape." The boy clung to her skirt, eyes wide. She looked at the canyon walls towering above them, then back at him. "You'll die," she said, her voice shaking. He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe, but dying with purpose is not the same as dying in chains." He looked past her toward the families climbing the trail. "Go now. Every heartbeat matters." She hesitated, her throat tight with something she didn't understand, anger, fear, or perhaps the weight of a debt she couldn't repay. But the old man appeared beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Come, daughter," he said softly. "He knows the way of this ground. You do not." She let the elder guide her toward the narrow crack in the rock. Behind her, the warriors' men were spreading out, finding high ground, loading rifles, whispering to each other in tones meant for ghosts. The boy stumbled once and she lifted him, carrying him against her chest. The climb was steep, the stones rough, but she forced herself upward. When she reached a bend that overlooked the canyon floor, she turned and looked down. Below, firelight flickered in small patches as the first line of soldiers entered the canyon. Their torches looked like crawling stars. The sound of metal, of bridles and boots, echoed faintly. The warrior stood alone in their path, his horse behind him, his figure tall and still. The woman's heart hammered so hard it hurt. She whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood, one that had no name, only hope. The elder tugged her sleeve. "We cannot stop," he said. "They will see the light on our faces." Reluctantly, she turned away and followed the others higher into the rocks. The trail grew narrow, forcing them to move single file. The wind howled between the cliffs like a warning. Far below, a voice shouted an order in English. Then the sudden crack of a gunshot split the night. The sound echoed up the canyon walls. Another shot followed, then another. The woman stopped, her breath catching. The boy whimpered softly, pressing his face against her shoulder. She wanted to cover his ears, to hide him from everything. But the shots kept coming, followed by the roar of answering rifles. The Apache defenders were firing from the ridges now, flashes of light cutting through the dark. Smoke began to rise from the canyon floor. The elder urged the group onward. "Do not look back," he said. "He fights to buy your time. You waste his gift if you stand." She forced herself to move again, though her legs trembled. Every sound below struck her like a blow. The thud of hooves, the sharp cries of wounded men, the hollow ring of metal against stone. The night smelled of gunpowder and fear. At the top of the ridge they reached a plateau overlooking the desert. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow over the dry land that stretched endlessly to the horizon. The families huddled together, breathless, listening to the battle below. The woman knelt beside the boy, wrapping him in her blanket. He was shaking, but silent, his small hand gripping hers tightly. The elder moved among the people, murmuring prayers in his language, his voice low and steady. But the woman could hear the doubt beneath his calm. They all knew the soldiers would not stop once the canyon fell. They would hunt the trail, follow the tracks, chase until dawn. Below them, the gunfire began to fade, replaced by shouting. She couldn't tell who was winning, only that it was ending. Then came a single scream, cut short, and the echo of a bugle again, lower, slower. Her stomach turned cold. She rose, her heart pounding. The elder caught her arm. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You must not go down." She pulled away. "He'll die down there alone." His eyes were sad but firm. He knew that when he stayed. "I can't leave him," she whispered. "He saved me. He saved all of you." The old man's face softened. "If you go, you may die with him." "But maybe that is the truth you must find." She didn't answer. She pulled the blanket tighter around the boy and handed him to a young woman standing nearby. "Keep him safe," she said. "If I don't return, tell him he was found by kindness, not war." Before the elder could stop her, she turned and started down the slope. The wind tore at her hair and filled her eyes with grit, but she kept going, her steps quick and silent. The echoes of the fight guided her, faint but steady. When she reached the last ridge before the canyon floor, she crouched behind a rock and looked down. The scene below burned into her memory. The canyon was filled with the glow of torches and the flicker of fires where the soldiers had gathered. Bodies lay scattered among the rocks, some in blue, some in shadow. The Apache warrior stood near the mouth of the canyon, leaning against his horse. His shoulder was bleeding, his rifle empty, but his eyes were fixed on the officers arguing beside the fire. She saw him take a step forward, his hand still on his knife. One of the soldiers turned and shouted. A gun was raised. The woman gasped, and without thinking she rose and slid down the slope, rocks tumbling around her. She didn't know what she would do. She only knew she couldn't stand there while the world took him too. The sound caught the soldiers' attention. They turned their guns toward the noise. She froze, breathless, half hidden by the rocks. The warrior saw her then, his eyes widening. He shook his head sharply, a silent plea for her to go back. But she couldn't. The officer raised his voice. "Hold fire," he barked. "We need them alive." His tone was cold, commanding. The soldiers hesitated. The officer stepped closer, pointing his revolver toward the warrior. "You're coming with us," he said. "Your people are done. We'll take you to Fort Loomis. You'll answer for the raid." The warrior straightened slowly. "Then you'll answer for the children your men burned," he said. The officer sneered. "You think your words matter?" The tension crackled in the air like lightning waiting for thunder. The woman's hands shook as she searched for something, a rock, a weapon, anything. But before she could move, one of the soldiers spotted her and shouted, "Sir, there's another." The officer spun, raising his gun toward her. For a moment the world went still. The torches flickering, the dust swirling, the sound of her heartbeat louder than anything. The warrior moved before anyone else could react. He threw himself forward, grabbing the officer's arm and twisting it aside. The gun fired, the flash blinding her. The shot hit the rocks behind her and sparks flew. The canyon exploded in noise again. The soldiers rushed forward and the Apache warriors who still lived rose from the shadows, answering with desperate fire. The woman stumbled, ducking behind a fallen horse. Smoke filled the air. Through it, she saw the warrior fighting hand to hand, his knife flashing in the torchlight. A soldier charged toward her. She turned, grabbed a burning branch from the ground and swung it wildly. It struck his arm and he fell back cursing. The heat scorched her hand, but she didn't stop. She ran toward the warrior, calling his name though she didn't know if he could hear her. He turned at the sound, blood running down his side. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked again across the chaos. In them, she saw everything, the fire, the loss, the strange mercy that had tied them together since that first dawn. Then the bugle called again, this time from far off. Reinforcements. The sound swept through the canyon like doom. The officer, wounded but alive, shouted for retreat. The soldiers began pulling back, dragging their injured with them. But the Apache fighters were spent, their ammunition gone. The woman reached the warrior just as he stumbled. She caught him under the arm, half pulling, half dragging him toward the rocks. His breath came in harsh gasps. "You should have gone," he whispered. "I couldn't," she said. "Not without you." He looked at her, his face pale under the torchlight. "Then we run," he said. They started toward the back of the canyon, the sound of hooves echoing again behind them. The firelight grew dim, replaced by the cold silver of the moon. Around them the shadows moved, some friend, some foe. The woman didn't know which. The elder's warning still echoed in her mind. Not all who live are free. She gripped the warrior's arm tighter as they climbed over the rocks, the boy's face flashing in her memory, the cries of soldiers fading behind them. Every step forward felt like walking on the edge of fate, with the storm of war at their backs and a silence waiting ahead that could mean either freedom or the end. The night stretched long and cold as the woman and the Apache warrior moved through the rocky land, their breath clouding in the moonlight. Behind them, the echoes of the battle faded until only the whisper of the wind remained. The smell of smoke drifted far across the valley, reminding them of everything they had left behind. The warrior leaned heavily on her shoulder, his steps uneven but steady. She could feel the weight of his pain in every breath he took, yet he didn't complain. He walked as if every drop of strength was borrowed from the land itself. They reached a narrow gully where the rocks formed a shallow shelter. The woman guided him down carefully, easing him against the wall. His wound was deep but not fatal. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against the bleeding side, whispering softly, though she didn't know if he could hear her. The moonlight caught his face, showing lines of exhaustion and grit. His eyes opened slowly, meeting hers. "They will come again," he said. "The soldiers. They will not stop," she shook her head. "They won't find us. The storm's covering our trail." He gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "You speak like one who knows this land." "Maybe I'm learning," she said. "You taught me that." He watched her for a moment, then looked toward the open desert. "You should go to your people when the sun rises. There's a town west of here. They will take you in." Her heart tightened. "And what about you?" "I'll find the others," he said quietly. "The elder will lead them to the mesas. There's still land there no one has taken. We'll rebuild." She could hear the weakness in his voice and the pain he tried to hide. "You can barely stand," she said. "You need rest. You need help." He shook his head. "My people have only what they can carry. If I do not go, they'll think I fell. The land needs stories of those who survive, not of those who hide." She pressed her hands against his wound again, anger and sorrow mixing in her chest. "You talk about surviving, but you're bleeding to death. You can't help anyone if you're gone." He caught her wrist gently, his hand warm despite the cold. "And you," he said. "You said you'd rather die than belong to me. Yet here you are." The word struck her like a slow echo. For a long moment she couldn't answer. Then she looked at him and said, "I didn't stay because I belonged to you. I stayed because you're the only one who saw me as more than something to be taken." He looked away, his eyes tracing the horizon where dawn would come. "The world you came from will not understand what happened here," he said. "To them, you'll always be a woman taken and then freed. They won't believe there was anything in between." "I don't care what they believe," she whispered. The first pale light of morning began to touch the sky. The desert looked softer now, like the world had taken a breath after the storm. She could see the outlines of distant hills, the shapes of cacti rising like silent witnesses. The air was sharp and clean, and somewhere a lone bird called out. She helped him drink from the water skin and tore another piece of cloth for his side. As the sun climbed, they heard faint movement behind them, a soft crunch of footsteps. The woman froze, her heart racing, but then a small voice called her name. The boy appeared from between the rocks, his face streaked with dust but alive. He ran toward her, and she caught him in her arms, trembling with relief. Behind him came the elder and two of the younger warriors, weary but unhurt. "We thought you were gone," the elder said. "The soldiers followed the river instead of the trail. The storm saved us." The woman helped the Apache to his feet as the elder approached. Their eyes met in silence. The old man nodded slowly. "He fought well," he said. "The spirits will remember." The warrior's voice was low. "We must move before noon. They'll search the flats next." The elder glanced at the woman. You can come with us or you can go west to the town. The choice is yours. But if you come, you will not return to the world you left. You will live as we do, between sky and sand. She looked down at the boy. His hand found hers, small and trusting. She looked at the warrior, standing weak but proud, and then toward the distant line where the horizon shimmered. The memory of her burned home flickered in her mind. The life she had lost, the people who were gone. That world had turned its back on her long before this one had offered her a place. "I'll go with you," she said softly. The elder studied her face, then nodded once. "Then you will learn to walk with both worlds in your heart," he said. They began their journey north, the sun climbing high above them. The land stretched out endless, wild, and untamed. Each step carried the weight of everything left behind and the fragile hope of what might come next. The woman helped the Apache onto his horse, and the group moved slowly through the rocks. The boy walked beside her, clutching her skirt. By afternoon, they reached the edge of a wide plateau. From there, they could see the valley spread below, the faint glimmer of smoke from the ruined canyon, and the far line of green that marked the river. The elder stopped and raised his staff toward the horizon. "That is where we'll go," he said. "Beyond that ridge, the land still belongs to no one." The woman looked back once, toward the south where the soldiers would ride, following trails that led nowhere. She felt no fear now, only a strange calm. The wind lifted her hair, warm and dry. She took the boy's hand again and followed the others toward the ridge. That evening, when they stopped to rest, the warrior's fever had broken. The woman sat beside him as the sun sank behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. "You should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be long." He turned his head toward her. "You still have time to leave," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "You're still trying to send me away?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I only don't want to see you become lost in our fight. It never ends." "Maybe some fights are worth standing beside," she said. He didn't answer, but there was peace in his eyes now, the kind that comes when a man stops running from what he can't change. Night settled soft and cool. The stars came out bright above them, scattered across the dark sky like a map without borders. The camp was quiet except for the sound of firewood crackling and the faint murmur of a lullaby from one of the women. The boy had fallen asleep beside her, his small face turned toward the warmth. The woman looked at him and thought of how life could still grow even in a place the world had forgotten. She thought of the chain that had once bound her and how it had been cut not just from her wrists but from something deeper inside. Freedom, she realized, wasn't about where she stood or who she was with. It was about choosing her own path, even when the world refused to understand it. When the warrior stirred, she turned to him. "What will you do when you reach the mesas?" she asked. He looked toward the stars. "We'll build again. Small homes, a garden where the ground still gives. Teach the children to live without fear. And the soldiers? They will come again," he said. "But maybe by then they will see we only want to live." The firelight flickered across his face, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something gentle there, something almost like hope. She reached out and placed her hand over his, rough and scarred but steady. "Then I'll stay," she said quietly. "Not because I owe you anything, but because I finally have a place to stand." He looked at her, and the faintest smile touched his lips. "Then the dawn will not find me alone." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of wild sage across the plateau. The stars shimmered brighter as if listening to their silence. Somewhere in the dark a coyote cried, a lonely sound but not hopeless. The woman leaned back, looking up at the sky. The past felt distant now, softened by distance and dust. Ahead lay a life she had not imagined but had somehow chosen. When dawn finally came, the first light touched the mesas with gold. The camp stirred slowly, people waking to a world still uncertain but alive. The woman stood, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders. The boy ran to her side, grinning, his fear gone. She turned to see the Apache warrior standing beside his horse, ready to move. He met her eyes and nodded once, a quiet promise, simple but unbreakable. They rode together as the sun rose behind them, its light spilling over the endless land. The world ahead was harsh and wild, but it was theirs to face. And though the woman had once sworn she'd rather die than belong to any man, she now understood what freedom truly meant. It wasn't in being owned or alone. It was in standing beside someone, not out of fear or debt, but out of choice. As the wind carried their tracks into the vast desert, the land seemed to breathe again, forgiving what had been broken. The war, the loss, the pain, they would all fade in time. But the story of that dawn, when a woman found her strength and a warrior found his peace, would live on in the whispers of the wind and the memory of the earth.